and welcome back to another episode of the Working Class Fishing. I am John Morris, along with Brian Keachley, and our guest today is Kathryn Williamson. Kathryn, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Doing well.
Fantastic. So,
Kathryn, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, go ahead, John. I'll let you lead it off.
So I was just gonna say, we've spoken on Instagram. That's kind of where we all linked up to make this happen. Your page is phenomenal. You do a lot of really awesome stuff, and I just want to express our gratitude for coming on to the show with us. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I feel like it is a little community on Instagram, so it's nice to be looking at everyone and putting really a face to a name.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So, seeing what you're doing and out and about and all that good stuff, it's so cool because when I got a chance to really look at your Instagram page and Instagram stalk you and do all this other stuff, I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. She's out looking at, your name obviously on there is Lady Shed Hunter. So I was like, okay, so she's into hunting sheds. And then you sent us a comment on something. I think it had to do with shad fishing. I believe is what it was. I think I put up a picture of a shad or something. You're like, hey, what are you using? And John says, oh, I'm sure that Brian's using this and this and this. And I think I popped in and I responded back. So it ended up with like multiple responses on what we were doing. But then it was like, well, this is cool. So start looking at your page and the page is like, you're out shed hunting, you're fishing, you're doing a lot of stuff with your family and everything else. And it was like, man, she's doing everything outdoors. How did you get started with that?
I think I got started after my son got a little older, because I think anyone who has kids, right, you have that age where, they're more dependent on you, and they want to stay closer to you. And I totally get that, but I think as he got older, and he's 8 now, I realized, I don't want to say you have more free time, right? But, I realized that I needed to, step back a little bit and let him come forward. And also, we had just bought a house, and it was literally across the street from a strip mall, but it's right by the Delaware and Merritt Canal, New Jersey. So there was literally a lot to do, and when I first started shed hunting, I'd be looking out my window and, seeing the deer go by. And it was, it's a little, what's that word? It's disconcerting to see them watching you over the wall, like when you're refilling the bird feeder. And I'm like, hi guys, and you stay over there, But it really, and I remember when I found my first shed, I was going through like a rough patch with my health, and I remember saying to myself, dear God, this is pretty cool. If I could find the other one, I'm like, I'll thank you forever. And I found the one. And then one of my friends at work was like, shed hunting is a thing. And I'm like, really? And that started everything. I mean, I even to the point in my life where I realized I wanted to leave like an impact on things, right? I mean, I think not just when you have kids, right? But I ended up getting it trademarked because I wanted to kind of show people, what I like to do, how I like to do it. And also, and this is probably going to cliche, right? Because everyone has that aha moment. And I was watching Meat Eater for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up. My parents belonged to the Massachusetts Audubon. They were very, very anti-hunting. And once I started watching Meat Eater, right, that I didn't realize how much care people put into things, and I ended up partnering with the local New Jersey Audubon. They granted my wildlife salvage license, because in New Jersey, it's very, very regimented in terms of I can't keep dead heads myself. I can donate them. And I started giving them to the Audubon. And they even said to me, they're like, oh, this is great. All the skulls, we have the teeth are falling out of them, because I got the kids like to hold them and play with them. And I literally came across this fully articulated skeleton of a gorgeous buck, and there was a flood, and I finally found just the skull again. So I started giving them things, and it made me realize, even from the hunters, then they don't realize sometimes how interested the community is, and unfortunate where I live, right? That you have, Out Unlimited, you have Orbis. I mean, there's a lot of kind of like high-end, well-recognized organizations. It's a very, Princeton, New Jersey, you have the university. It's a very educated community, but at the same time, I felt like just for like someone who likes to explore in the backyard, my degree's in biology, although I'm not using it at all right now. I kind of realized it was like a little gap. And my son was always interested in what I dragged home. But the problem was I caught him one day with the deer antlers like this, and he's gonna be a deer for Halloween. And I just had this image of him running through the neighborhood in the dark, like goring people. So I was like, I need to. It was horrible. I was like, I need to figure out a way to be on my wall. So I think everything I've done, it was literally, the bounty of nature, and partly too, like, I think a lot of us are very persistent about things, and I'm the kind of person who will track that, deer, through the woods, picking ticks off me, and along the way, I think as a well-rounded outdoors woman, like fishing, bird watching, I'm horrible. Like, I kind of look at it as, if the fish aren't biting, I'll be the kind of person to like reel my rod in. Then I'll go, wandering through the woods. I've actually lost a nice carp rod that way. It fell out of my backpack somewhere. I don't know where it is. But I think that's how I got started in a very long-winded way. It was kind of like, what's out your window? And then you realize, oh my God, there's awesome stuff out your window. And it's kind of like, how open-minded do you want to be? And I also have a very supportive husband and a very supportive son. I mean, my husband's not as outdoorsy as I am, but he's more than happy, to sit with my son, because I mean, an 8-year-old has a lot of patience, but only to a degree, and I've even said to him very gently, I'm like, Johnny, places I go, like, as an adult, I'm willing to take the risk, but for him, I'd rather him, catch a small bluegill, I guess. I mean, even the, 7 or 8 inch ones, right? That will eat anything,
Yeah.
to your point, Brian, a small child reeling that in. I just had this image of him, like, in the fish going down the canal. So I'm like, you know what? Maybe mommy will take this one,
No, that's
No, that
go ahead, John.
yeah, no, that's really cool. That thanks for sharing that. No, that's I've got an 8-year-old myself, and he lacks the patience to get out there and really. He loves nature and he loves the outdoors, but he hasn't acquired that patience quite yet for fishing. I'm not sure he ever will, but that's just really cool. It's awesome that you got a good support channel there in the household. That's awesome.
we have a lot of fun. And I think too, especially with COVID and the pandemic, I think you really get curious to see what else is out there and what other people are doing. And I'll be honest, I'm just a nosy kind of thing too, right? If I see, if I see something going on, I'm like, oh, what you using? And it's kind of harder, right? When, we're all inside, So I think Instagram has become a perfect way to be nosy. I mean, it's a funny little community, right? But I think a lot of the people I've met have really been, to your point, like responding to a post I mean, not everyone is as open, right? But I said to my husband once, because would send me pictures, and Instagram and Facebook will, flag them as questionable content. They've always been like deadheads, antlers, skulls, fish. And Instagram's like graphic. Do you want to click on it? I'm like, yep. And I said to my husband, I'm like, I'll get another deadhead. And he's like, people are sending you your parts. I'm like, yep. But I think too, you have to be on the back end, right? Like, you have to be willing to, have those conversations. I mean, I just was recently nominated to the board of my little local Trout Unlimited chapter, and
Oh, cool.
I ran into the president years ago out fishing, and it was hysterical. I have a picture of him. Like, it was like freezing cold, it had just opened up. I think it was last year, and everyone was just desperate to get out there, but we were trying to keep our distance. And I remember I was like, he was like, what do you do? He's like, you need a sinker. I'm like, what? He's like, you need a sinker. So now we're inching along the banks of the river. I mean, it was like if Monty Python goes fishing. I mean, my local trout unlimited is like, it's he literally showed up when I met him like last at the beginning of this month for the chapter picnic. He drives this like Volkswagen Vanagon or whatever it looks like a Scooby-Doo mobile. And when he honks it, it's like, and I was like, oh my God, that is not my Trout Unlimited chapter van. And it was. And I pull up and he's like, hey, Kathryn. I mean, if you want to be accessible, because we talked about this too when he asked me about I wanted to, have my name thrown up for, a spot on the board. I even said to him, I was like, look, dude, I was like, I haven't gotten my fly rod out yet. I've been so busy, using cicadas as live bait and spin fishing. But he said to me, he said, but that's the thing. He's like, especially with Trout Unlimited, it's a lot of people think it's just about trout and it's just about fly fishing. He's like, it really isn't. He's like, it's really about keeping the waterways and keeping the banks accessible to everyone. I mean, and I think that's important too, because like I remember the Audubon, I remember Trout Unlimited. There's a lot of things out there, I think, on both sides, not just from, the general citizens, but members of these organizations. You kind of have to be open to both ideas. I mean, and I think that's what makes Instagram unique, because, I fly fish, I try to fly tie, I'm nowhere as good as John, but a lot of what I do, I realize you have to be holistic about it. I think, and that's what the president said. He said, I'd rather someone go out fishing, than just not go out at all. He's like, I don't really care what people do. It would be nice if they fly. Because our Trout Unlimited chapter is Ernest Schreiber, and he was like the king of like East Coast fly fishing. And if you read some of the comments on Facebook, they said he was a very humble man. I guess there was some conference that someone was at, and they had like everyone up on the podium, and he was sitting in the back of everyone else. Like, you want to come up? He's like, oh no, I want to just sit back here. I mean, I think that's a good way to look at it too, right? Like I think he was just happy that people were out doing things. I mean, now Trout Unlimited, they do a lot of things at a national level, the Pebble Mine. I mean, it's good that they can flex their clout, but I think people forget
Sorry.
that that there's other things to do out there. Like, it was your cat
She
stealing
was
something.
trying, yeah, she's trying to get this. I've got some furnace hackles up here for some gnats. Sorry.
Yeah, that's the dangers, right? Like every now and then I'll be trying to pose my antlers and like you sometimes you see my cat because she'll be like, what you doing? Gently push her back, and she'll not so gently come forward, and or I'm trying to tie something and I've dropped bobbins or threads, and you hear them go, and the cat's like, party time, and I'm like, please don't do that. That's the risk, right, of like having pets. I mean, they're, although every now and then I've looked at her, and to our earlier point, I've looked at her beautiful gray coat, and I was like, honey, maybe I could, use some of that for dubbing. I mean, I've heard of people going, and I'll go off on a tangent here. One of the fly tyers in my area, the local pond that he fishes at, the kids feed the fish Cheerios. So he literally had tied a little tiny fly shaped like a Cheerio, and he said it worked perfectly. And he's like, mash the hatch. I'm like, Bart, Cheerios come out of a box, but I'm like, you know what? It's okay. And he said he just is casting his little Cheerio fly, getting these bluegills. And I was like, way to upcycle things.
That's awesome.
You use the General Mills nymph, I guess, is what you could call it.
Actually, if I see him, I'll tell him that. I'll be like, General Mills ain't got nothing on you, but
yeah, exactly.
hey, you never know. Pinfish they're vicious little guys, right? Like, they'll eat anything. Like, I literally, because we're right in the middle of like the Budex hatch, and I take the six fishing. I've been testing them out on different little hooks. I've actually thrown in empty hooks by accident. They'll go after them. I mean, it's amazing what fish will do. I've gotten a catfish. I've gotten a little pickerel. I mean, I always wanted to know, conservation end. I'd love to know if the fish get bigger every 17 years because the amount of food out there is insane. And they're just at the point now where the cicadas are starting to die off. But for a while, they were not eating the dead ones. So I was literally, I feel them land on me. I just grab it, hook it, stuff back out there. And I, find this, one that was deceased and I throw it out there and you literally see the fish. No one was, attacking it, but you see them circling it. I'm like, come on, dude. I'm like, it's perfectly fine. I just died today. And they were like, we want the live ones. And I'm like, I can't help you here, buddy. But I mean, and cicadas, like, they're good size. I mean, I don't think you have them, but it's a bit disconcerting if you're lying in bed at night and you hear them hit the house. Like, you hear dunk, dunk. And my husband's like, 17 years from now, it won't happen again for 17 years. You go outside, they're laying down, and my cat, well, we used to carry them in on us, not knowing it. My cat would get all excited and she tried to eat it. And I was like, thank you so much for that cicada. Can I have it back, please? Thank you so much. And the cicada is like, just kill me or, let me go. But cats. She's playing with it, it's drooled on, its wings are crooked, and its eyes are bulging even more. So I've been letting it go. But I mean, it's interesting, like even watching them go after the fish go after the cicadas, for a while, depending on where we were, the cicadas were coming in waves. So the cicadas were like where we are, the canal, there's a lot more overhanging vegetation. So the cicadas were following, I guess, into the water fast than they were around some of the big lakes. So it was kind of neat to like come out one weekend and, I'm throwing everything I can, including cicadas, and the fish are like, I don't know what this is, come back, the weekend after. They're like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I mean, it's pretty neat. I've even started teasing them because, I feel bad fishing in winter. I want them to get something, So I was like, I just have my little, I don't know, Ziplocs of frozen cicadas. I want to do a little experiment in the fall and see what happens. I mean, I know for my husband, he was like, where are all the Tupperwares going? I'm like, he's like, is there cicadas in there? So I actually had to get some more containers on Amazon because I felt bad.
Oh, that's an interesting issue there because I'm sure that John and I's wives would both tell you that more of the kitchenware, well, maybe my wife, I don't know about John, I don't want to speak for him, but my wife will be like, didn't we have some those little Ziploc containers that I thought we had more of them? And then she goes out there, she's like, why are you using these for this or that? I'll be like, well, it looked all nasty and scratched up, so I'm curing eggs in this one, and I got shrimp in this one, for fishing. And she'll be like, all right, whatever, and so she kind of gives up on it at a certain point, because she'll go get in the bait fridge and she'll be like, what is going on here? Because I'll have like I'll have some prawns dyed in there or something like that, and then I'll have some cured steelhead eggs and another one, and she's like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm making bait. And she was like, well, I'm glad that you're making bait. Can you go get a special thing? I'm like, why am I going to go down to the fishing store and pay like 6 times more because it's a Plano brand or what, whoever, when I could just go and get the Ziploc brand, throw it in there. And if it gets broken and nasty down on the river, I'll throw it in the garbage can. It's done. So it's kind of funny. Like you're out collecting bugs and putting the bugs in your kitchenware. Where mostly that's like one of those things where it's like the reverse role. Your husband's like, what's happening to all of our Tupperware? And you're like, I don't know. That's awesome. But something that
chill. I mean,
oh, that's cool though. I mean, I think anybody can appreciate that, especially when you have a family that's out and you're fishing and you're, doing that kind of thing. But something you said earlier that kind of piqued my curiosity because out west here, TU is fairly involved with like habitat restoration and stream bank enhancement, things like that. But TU out west here, commonly, we talk about stereotypes and all this other stuff. And you mentioned that TU's often thought about as being like a fly fishing only club for the elite angler that is all about fly fishing, catch and release, all this other stuff. But you touched on your TU chapter, and you're speaking to your local TU chapter. Sounds to me like they're a pretty all inclusive, welcoming group of folks. What's been your experience with TU? Obviously, being elected to the board there and everything else, I'm curious to know. What's your experience with Trout Unlimited there?
I mean, I joined it recently because we have a very well-known fly type, Bart Lombardo. He's on Instagram as Panfish on the Fly. And I met him actually at my local Orvis store, and he was pretty easygoing. I mean, I used to do a lot of spin fishing before my wrist gave out, and I would tie my own jigs, and I still do. And I was running out of hooks, and I remember I kind of stomped into Orvis. I had my little pack on, and they all got excited, like, oh, I think I need some hooks, and they were like, oh, well, what do you do? And I was like, well, I mean, a lot of the people in my store, I think maybe because it's a college town, it's a very wealthy community, but it is fairly diverse. I think they're relatively used to people coming in, but someone like me, I think just randomly coming in, like I literally will come in and be like, I need hooks. I think it's mostly pros, and then there's everyday fishermen, and then there's me. I mean, I found them pretty easygoing. I mean, they're starting to sell Tenkara rods. I think even TU understands that they kind of do need to reach out, because I mean, when I was nominated, I was talking to the president, and he said, we really want to bring more women into fishing. I mean, we really want to get more people out there. I mean, it's a good conservation organization. I mean, but I think too, it's not, if you're looking for, I think sometimes the fly fishing aspect of it probably puts people off, because fly fishing is very technique oriented. I mean, I'm still an awful caster. I'm getting better. But I think a lot of the
We all are.
knowledge of
Yeah.
fishing, oh yeah, you should see me, and I'm like getting it out of the tree. My back cast is like all the way, like I look like my wrist is.
We all hook trees. Don't worry
Yeah.
about it. I still hook tons of trees. So yeah, you're in good company here.
I mean, oh good.
Yeah.
I mean, I like TU a lot. I mean, I think it's an interesting experience, but again, I think for us, I think out west, because of the wide open spaces, I do think it's probably more of a presence versus on the East Coast. I mean, you have like there are trout fishing schools, and up in Vermont where it started. But where I am, it's pretty chill. I mean, I think New Jersey is an odd little place where we have like fly fishing show. I went there last spring, 2 springs ago. I mean, but I do get a sense that a lot of organizations out there want to become more diverse. I mean, I was on Instagram, I discovered Hunters of Color. I mean, that's another great group there as well. I mean, just as a woman and a person of color, I said to my husband once, I'm like, I'm sure all the guys out there fishing don't get asked as many times as I do, hey, what are you catching? I don't think people are just used to seeing women out fishing, especially, as my husband said, he's like, you're catching things every day, or lady shed hunters or that kind of thing. Who do it? And that's why I said to myself too, going back to how I got started, I was like, if I have an opportunity to kind of show people that, not just men do this, but women do this, women of color, I kind of was like, you know what, I'm already doing it anyway. If I can get myself out there and learn a lot more and make myself a better hunter, a better fisherwoman, I mean, I'm all for it. And the TU by me, they also fish along the same fishing grounds as I do. So every now and then I'll run into people, and that's actually how I've met most of the TU members, is randomly fishing. So they're very active. They've even said to me too, they want to make sure that they're more inclusive, and also, if you even think about technology, right, with social media, they want to kind of revitalize the platform and bring more people in. And when I met the president, he was like, I thought of you immediately. He was like, because you're out there all the time, He's like, we need to be more inclusive to women. So I think for them, if you're receptive to it on the other end as well, like, and I don't want to say it's a changing of the guard, although it kind of is, right? But I think that the world is very diverse, and I do feel like a lot of organizations are, I don't want to say they're just realizing it, but too, right? Like they haven't they haven't maybe done a different kind of outreach before, especially with the new media platforms that they're trying to get on. So that, I mean, I know my child eliminating chapter a lot, but it's kind of like, to me, it was easy for me to come into it because I was already out there in a lot of the waters. I'm already familiar with it. I mean, I think if they had come to me 2 years ago when I had really just started doing a lot of this stuff, I probably wouldn't have been as receptive. But, coming to me now and saying, hey, 2 years later, would you like to join? And 2 years later, feeling more determined to, make the world a better place. I was like, I know, why not? But again, I think there's a lot of opportunities out there for people. And I think two organizations, they've even said, like, we always need volunteers, but how do you get volunteers? I almost feel like you're competing for a pool of applicants that, might be big, but with the advent of social media, right? Like, everyone might want Brian on their podcast, right? But how does one get Brian? How does one get John? I think it's just a balancing act. You don't want to overwhelm people or underwhelm them, but at the same time, I think there has to be that desire to change, to be more inclusive. And I know my little local TU, is very focused on changing.
Yeah. Well, and I think probably one of those other things, and maybe John, you can jump in here too. John and I, like I said, we've always talked about like that inclusion part, and that's a very important phrase, term, word to use, is the inclusion aspect of in our case here, talking about fishing, because I believe that fishing, and this is just my personal opinion, I believe fishing is one of the very few activities that anybody and everybody can access and enjoy, whether you are brand new to it or very experienced. And I think that the idea that it's a particular fishing style is only for a certain demographic or sex or race or origin of people is absolutely ridiculous. And I don't think that you see a lot of that in fishing. I don't believe that that's something that you see a lot of in fishing. I don't think that the popular parts of society exclude in respect to fishing. Obviously, fishing is one of those early hunter-gatherer type activities, because humans as a whole, as a species, have been fishing for a long time through different methods. And I believe that that's something that universally that's there. Only until recently, though, in the advent of different types of fishing gear, has it become exclusionary. And that's the bizarre part to me, because that it seems to have been more grouped into this little niche of like this certain group of people and all this other stuff. So I'll name it, claim it, because I don't care who I make mad, right? This group of men that get together and they drink beer and they go fishing with their buddies, and it's to leave the wives at home and not do anything else but be out there. That to me, that has went away, and I believe that it's become more accessible. But as you said, a lot of these other groups of folks that are out there, they still tend to have kind of that exclusionary feel, although they haven't articulated that they are open and inclusive. And so I think it's really important that that you're spearheading that. But John, you got anything to add to that?
Just, yeah, I think it's really awesome. And I think inclusion is probably the best term for that. Just, coming from the South, yeah, we do have a lot of female anglers, and I'm not trying to misspeak here. I don't talk about this a lot. I think about it a lot. I don't talk about it a lot, so forgive me if I don't articulate this very well. There's just not a lot of women or female anglers here in the South now. There are some, and there are some that are quite famous, but when for the longest time when I thought fishing, it was just just these old guys out there on the lakes and rivers. And I think now, as getting back into fishing as strongly as I have, we're getting a lot more women involved, I believe, or more to my knowledge. Maybe Instagram has made it more apparent to me
Mhm.
that there are just so many more women getting involved in fishing, and I think that's excellent. And people of color, it's fantastic that it one of the things Brian and I talk about is this stigma that's there for fishing, and we're all about opening up and just completely breaking that stigma, because fishing is for everyone. And I think you and your Tribe Unlimited and a lot of other great folks are really showing it to everyone that this is for everyone and everyone can enjoy this. So
I agree. And I think it's important to do that, right? I mean, because I feel like the more people out on the water, the better too. And to steal like what paraphrase Steve Vanella from me to do, right? Some of the best advocates for, keeping everything open and keeping it clean are really the men and women who use it, right? I mean, if you're out there day to day, right, you probably have a better eye on things, right? If there's an invasive species coming in, or if there's, someone, trespassing badly, causing a lot of damage. I mean, every now and then, I default from being altruistic about it, because to me, again, as a woman and as a person of color, diversity is very important. But if to look at it this way, like, the world is not just one shade, the world is many shades, right? The world is very different, and also to me, right, if I step back and say we need to be more diverse, we need to save the planet. you One way to look at it too is the more people involved, to me, the better. The more eyes you have out there, the better. The more people who see the day to day on the water, who can help out. I mean, some people do need to see I don't want to say the what's in it for me, but I do think a lot of people are like, well, what's in it for me? This has worked for so long, for me, this is kind of how, to your point, how it's been seen, how it's been marketed to, when you change it. And my default would be, look, if you want to keep that little river clean, if you want to keep it free, if you want to keep it accessible, you need more people in the river. I mean, I think every now and then it's when you're confronted with that situation, right? Like, I don't want to say altruism is the way to go, because I think we should do it, not just because, but because the world is different. But I think sometimes some people do have to be convinced with what's in it for me. And, that's why I even say to people like, want to keep that little river nice and clean, do you want to have a bridge going through it? How are you going to do that? And I think at the end of the day, it's a win-win for everyone, right? I mean, I would rather have more people out there than less, and I do think too, it's probably a generational thing, right? Like, and I think as the advent of social media comes on, I think, yes, it has been more accessible. I mean, my family, and I'm adopted, my family in South Korea were fishermen. My father was a commercial fisherman, but my family here in the States, like, they were backyard explorers, Audubon members, but they really weren't fishing and hunting. So this is kind of something I self-taught myself along the way. So I don't want things to die out either, right? So at the same time, I'd rather keep it alive, and pass the torch on to someone else, regardless of, race, creed, gender, location, whatever. I personally would rather keep it going, just because I don't want to lose things, versus keeping it so tight. I think too that probably has helped shift people's mind as well, right? Like, the world is only so big. If you want to keep that nice little pond open, you gotta let other people into it, not just because it's the right thing to do, but if you need more people to help you fight for keeping space accessible. And I mean, on the West Coast and maybe down in the South where it's more rural, I think even that sprawl or that accessibility might be less of a big deal. But around here, right, it's so close, it's so narrow. That's why, I have, like, great shed hunting ground across the street by the strip mall, because our land is getting so fragmented. you know I mean, that's one thing that's always boggled me, right? When you go out west, just this, huge open space. I mean, I was talking to Dragon Tail Tenkara, and that's where most of my little Tenkara routes come from. And they said something funny to me. Brandon said that most of the people who buy the rods, there's a big East Coast clientele, like me. And he said, it's odd because the West Coast has more space. That's why I think fly fishing might be seen as a West Coast thing, because you need a lot of space for that back cast, versus spinning, or spin casting. You can pretty much go straight forward. But he's like, East Coast people love Tenkara. And I was like, well, yeah, our streams are so small, like a 12-foot rod, I could probably poke someone's eye out on the other side of the water. And I kid you not, right? Like, but I think on the East Coast, right, I think people are willing to spend the time, because I feel like it's just so much so much more hard fought, right? Like a lot of urban cities, Boston, I grew up in
Absolutely.
Massachusetts. That it used to be nasty, right? And they've done because of all the old manufacturing. We've tried to clean it up so much. Like I think on the East Coast, it's kind of more apparent because it's just so much more tightly focused. Where West Coast, I think you still have that space, and you don't see maybe that impact of sprawl and fragmentation as much.
Well, one thing, just to kind of talk about the accessibility, right? Because there's another element to accessibility besides, the demographic and all that. And that's actually like available places to fish. Yeah, here in the West, things are massive. They're big. The rivers are big. The land expanse is big. Your travel to a lot of those locations is fairly significant. A lot of times, being able to be successful as an angler here, you have to have a boat because the rivers are so massive. You can spend 8 hours on a river floating, I don't know, 15 miles, just fishing every square inch of that. And for some people, that's like, that's insane that you could, fish that river for that long. But it's because the rivers are so large and there's so many different areas and the geology and all of that kind of stuff. But I think you touched on something really important there, and that was limited accessibility and limited availability of space, and something that seems to be a commonplace occurrence on the East Coast is that more and more urban sprawl and more development of stream bank habitat is really taking away from a lot of those available natural resources. Obviously, you're shed hunting behind a strip mall. In the West, that's such a foreign that would be so foreign for us. In order to effectively hunt for sheds, if I want to go hunt for sheds, I have to drive 2 hours up over a mountain range into the high desert where I have a pretty good idea where there might be some deer, and then you'll be lucky to see 1 or 2 people in an entire day, maybe a handful in a week, and you're literally out there by yourself getting circled by turkey vultures. That's where we go hunt for sheds. And so it's one of those things, you're like, huh, you're going out back where they might have a golden corral and finding sheds, and there's nothing even remotely close to that around here. So the challenges that you're facing, like trying to keep that there, how does that play into that whole culture there in your area? Because when somebody says New Jersey, and granted, I've watched Meat Eater, I watched Steve Ranella and all those guys. They went out and they were hunting coos deer, I believe, or something out in a swamp in New Jersey or something like that. Anyways, it just doesn't. When somebody says New Jersey and outdoors, it just does not coincide. That just does not mesh for me. When John talks about Tennessee in the outdoors, I'm like, yeah, okay, I can get that. Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, I can get that. But just overall,
you're like
culture.
New Jersey, oh my God.
Yeah, somebody's like, oh, New Jersey and fishing. I'm like, what's there? Even Maryland, I think of blue crabs, I think of striped bass, I think of American shad and everything else. Yeah, but I don't think of New Jersey as being a place where it's like I'm gonna fly into Newark and I'm gonna go and do some fly fishing in New Jersey. That's like the last place. So culturally speaking,
I I get it. No, I do. I mean, I think one reason why New Jersey isn't, we don't have, unless I have an inflatable kayak that literally looks like a glorified pool float, right? In Lily, because it's such a, we're right in the middle of the Delaware River Basin, and where I live in specifically, we have a lot of man-made canals and locks. There's a lot of smaller waterways. I mean, we do have Lake Carnegie, which is used by the University of Princeton for rowing, but the locks around here are neat. I mean, I've literally seen pictures of, horses pulling barges, up these tiny little tow paths. So there's a lot of mid waterways. They're very small, but I feel like you're not gonna get record-breaking fish, right? I think the record-breaking panfish came out, I think like from in Nevada or something, right? I mean, there just isn't.
Yeah.
I mean, New Jersey is seasonal. I mean, John, what was it like? Harvest.
Lake
Anyway, like,
Havasu.
Havasu. Yeah.
yeah, and it was a
Yeah.
huge one. Yeah. And I look at that and I'd be like, wow, if I'm lucky, right? I'll get a foot-long bass, after, getting stuck away, right? I mean, New Jersey does stock, but we don't, because of the climate, because of the location, we don't get the record breakers. But I feel like it's because it's such a small state and you have these pockets of hard fought wildlife sanctuaries and preserves, like we have a lot of organizations in parts of central New Jersey who have really worked hard to keep it green. And also, I'll be honest, you're not going to be able to dam up a canal. They're pretty deep. Some of them actually have very strong currents. So kind of like it's been left the way it is by default. So I think New Jersey is kind of like a hidden gem because you can fly fish here, right? You have enough man-made. I think if you head out west, you have a lot by the Poconos, which where we've been. You literally have like 3-foot-long striped bass. Like you feel on the shore, you have massive striped bass. I mean, but to your point, it's very small. It's not be record breaking, but I think in some ways the accessibility of it is great. I mean, hunting the same, like you're not gonna, I think New Jersey's ranked at like maybe, I don't know, like the 30th state for like bucks, because like they're gonna get hit by a car. It's just harder for them to get big and to stay big. I mean, but I think New Jersey is kind of like overlooked spot for recreation, in part because it's so small. Like I love a boat, but I don't need a boat. I don't even need waders. I do have my waders out to go, if I wanted to use them, but where I am at Lily's, go across the street, and ticks and get, deer antlers, or, Lily, go across the street the other way, dodge golf balls, and you can be right in the canal. That's what I think the West Coast, right? I think it would just blow my mind because I'm just so used to being able to go out the door with my rod. Like I keep my fishing rod in my car and just go fishing. And every now and then, like some people on TV are like, "Oh, you should go to like so and so, so and so." I'm like, "But why?" I'm like, I can walk across the street and get like at least a ton of 8-inch bluegills, or and kind of slip and slide down the banks and fall on my ass a couple of times and get my 14-inch bass, which I don't recommend, by the way. My hand was still numb. That's why I think it would be great for me to go at West and see. But to your point, I think when people think of New Jersey, they're like, "Oh, Newark, oh, it's gross, it's dirty." It is. It's very urban.
Yeah.
It's just an odd place. But one of the meat eater guys, Joe Cimelli, he actually grew up around here, and he actually sent me to this random fishing spot. And so I think even in New Jersey itself, right, it's kind of like this best kept secret. And I think that's why the people I tend to run into, they're very happy to talk to you. I ran into some guys during trout season opening, and they were like, "Oh, we were hoping you were coming over because we don't see too many women fishing, but most people around here, like, they know their stuff." They were like, "Yeah, the trout are going to start here because of stock. Then they go up the lock, Kingston, and then they disperse." I think there's a lot of people who fish around here, but they've done it for so long. It's kind of like backhand knowledge, where it's someone like me. I'm like, please tell me more. Where did you go? When did you go? I'm like, what did you use? What pound line did you use? Was it morning or afternoon?
All valid
You know,
questions. All
I mean,
totally valid.
I know, and I'll be the one like, hey, I'll be happy to sit and talk. And I think a lot of people around here are willing. If someone asks me seriously, and I've been hit on, I've been propositioned, like being a female angler, I think does have its upsides and downsides and everything. I mean, my husband even said to me, he's always worried I'm gonna get hurt when I'm out shed hunting. And I said to him, I have my Onyx hunt map now, and I was like, look, I'm like, I'll be usually one or two places, but I said to him once, I said, as a woman, I said, I'm more worried about people interactions, than animal interactions, And I said to him, I'm like, I can see people across the canal. I'm like, I can yell at them, but I think as a woman, it's just always something in the back of your mind. So have this urban sprawl forcing these pockets of green space, it's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? You're Brian, to your point, your chances of human interaction where I am are 100%. If you ever want a quiet day on the water, it's not going to happen. I've literally been fishing, and people are like, I swear, I see my coworkers on the bed. They're like, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, it's my day off. I'm like, can we not talk about work? I'm like, oh my God, But at the same time, right, the negative people interactions, unfortunately, because the East Coast is just so populated, that unfortunately goes as well.
So I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. Something you said, this might be too far back. Brian might kill me for this later, but you said you said you're small, Trout Unlimited. It may be small, but I looked into your chapter today, and it was it's named after Ernest Schwiebert, which is a Fly Fishing Hall of Fame inductee. He was one of the original founders of Trout Unlimited, and your chapter was inducted in 1974. But I found
that's older than I am.
And it was just really cool. All this. I was reading a lot about that, and then I got really interested in it. There's a lot of really rich history behind Ernest's name, and I think it's fantastic that your chapter is named after a great American fly fisherman. It is just really cool. I just wanted to share that. I did a little reading on your chapter today, and it's really cool. But
the president was a friend of his son, which I didn't realize until I met him either. He even said to me that was how he kind of got brought into Trout Unlimited. Stu hit one of his sons, Eric, and that was, I think, on the Facebook page you have like that quote from Eric talking about like what his dad would want to do. He just wants you to go out fish. He just wants to keep everything accessible and clean. I mean, I feel like on the East Coast, it is old. It's a very old place, right? Especially around here, right? So you have that knowledge, artist, right? But I mean, he's a brilliant man. Like his fly tying patterns, he was really, to your point, he was like an all-around fisherman. But when I was digging through the Facebook page, they had some quotes from people who met him in person. He was really humble. Like he literally did not want to sit up on the stage. He's like, yeah, I'm going to sit back here for the rest of you. And he's like, why do I have to go up there? I think that's important too, right? To be humble about things, as much as you can be humble, right? Being part of a very old fly tying chapter. But I think for TU, my little TU, right? It is small, right? I think we don't have like, I know Bart Lombardo is on like the central New Jersey, like we don't have a fly tire on it, like, right? Like we were actually talking about, Stu was trying to figure out how to do like more fly tying classes. So I kind of think of us as small because we don't really have bigger names headlining, our little chapter, right? I mean, the fly fishing shop in Edison is pretty cool. I went there a couple of years ago, and you have really a row of people tying flies. Like I met Britta Fordyce there. She's ties for Rio. She made these fabulous little shrimps that I have yet to use because they're just too awesome. You have Bart up there, and I even said to them, like, when the fly fishing show comes back, we're gonna have a table, but to me, I see it as small because member wise it is small, but to your point, John, the history of it is cool. I mean, we have Prince, like the Stu got the permission of the son and the estate to sell licensed copies of the Prince. I mean, it almost reminds me of John Audubon with the way he drew things and all that. It is
Yeah.
pretty neat,
Yeah.
I mean, we were there at the picnic, right? And they had, they had the Prince out, and then, then we had the cicadas. It was kind of funny. Then you have, you know, Eva Prince, right? And I'm like, oh my God. I think Ernest would be happy to be in that Volkswagen van. Like, I was like, welcome to Jersey, right? Like, there's just so many, yeah, it's a weird place. Like I show up at this, huge man-made lake. I'm trying to figure out like what group of party people is like my little group. And like to your point, like the 1974, try to live after, you know, the banner is on a Volkswagen bus. I was like, Scooby Doo in there. But I think that's what makes it so exciting. You never, I think in New Jersey, right? Because it's such a small place, you never know what you're gonna get, right? Like every time I said I go fishing for trout, I got suckers, I got pickerels. I said to my husband, I think just gonna go out and fish for a striped bass, and maybe I'll get a trout that way. It's a weirdly diverse pocket of water that in a weirdly diverse area I live in. But I think that's what makes it special, right? Like you go out every day, you never know.
Mhm.
So you
And
were
if you want
touching
a print, we can
on,
get you one. If you ever want a print, we can probably get you
oh, that would be
one.
rad. But you were touching on, so limited space. Um, is that just due to, I would almost call that combat fishing to an extent. Maybe it's not, it can't be as bad as it is out there in the West, but um, how, so you were talking about you can holler across the canal at someone. Is is there enough water really for everyone? And I mean, the answer is always yes, right? There's always enough water for everyone, but do you feel like it's a really heavily pressured waterway to actually be able to accomplish a successful day of fishing? Or we all find enjoyment in different facets of the outdoors, right? Just because we're not catching fish doesn't mean like maybe you see an eagle. That's awesome. I saw an
Mhm.
eagle the other day when I was fishing in Arkansas, and then I missed a topwater strike. Uh, it's just, um, do you find it, I guess what I'm trying to say, is it challenging with the amount of people at that specific waterway that you have to be successful fishing?
I would say yes, because there's a kayak right down the block. So I'm
Oh,
always like, I have that. I always say you have that window of time, like right where you're not gonna cast into a kayaker, right? Like,
the
I mean, we
plastic
joke about
hatch.
that sometimes. Yes, you know, and we also have like, if you go out on Lake Carnegie, you have the whalers, right? And you have the motor launches and you have like the crew boats. I mean, it's beautiful to watch. And I'll be honest, I love watching kayakers, because I would say 99.9% of the time they're very polite. They try to get out of the way. And honest, like it's good income for whoever's running that kayak rental. And I'd rather people enjoy that water than nothing. Um, but I do know in other parts of New Jersey, and I was reading about this on NJ.com. There's a battle going on where I think it's more towards, I don't exactly know where it is, and it's my fault, I should. But a lot of our dollars, right? This is why I always tell people you should get a fishing license for your state. Go to stocking, go to maintenance, right? And there are bodies of water that are becoming more privatized, right? Like where there want this specific body of water, there's no public boat launch. So in the past, when it was less crowded, a lot of the restaurants and, the marina, the private marinas would say, hey, anglers come during the day. Now no one can get in. And one of the comments I read was someone was like, well, look, that, the New Jersey Fish and Wildlife offering this, we as in everyone out there is paying for this. It should be publicly accessible. So I think where I am, there is not as much pressure to fish. It's actually a fairly well used waterway. But I've heard with some lakes, especially beginning of trout season, it's been really left as it is, right? Like I literally kid you not, I'm rappelling down, the banks to get to the water. So to me, when I talk about accessibility, it's tricky because I think there is more fishermen and fisherwomen than there are points to get to the waterways where you want. And it's for some of the bigger lakes, right? There's no public access. And where I am, I'm gonna knock on wood here. I've been fortunate where I can basically get out to where I want to go. I personally have never had a problem, but I can see that, and I kind of see it as a harbinger of things to come on the East Coast, where, for whatever reason, the infrastructure isn't up, right? Like, if just me getting onto my trails, right? I literally have, flash cutters if I want to get onto the path, right? I'm fine doing that, right? But I can see where there's a big body of water, right? And it's all private marinas and restaurants, and, there's literally no public boatway, that's a problem. And again, I feel like on the East Coast, more of a problem because it just physically is less space. Like they always say trout season, right? Like it can be shoulder to shoulder, right? If there's a rumor of a big run of stripers inland, like people will go. And personally, like I would love to get one, right? But I am just cautious for me, partly because I'm just such a bad fly fisherwoman sometimes. I don't want to hook someone, but I tend to like find my own little space, that's more fit. So I'm willing to sacrifice that first run of trout and get something random. But I can see where on the East Coast, when I talk about accessibility, it really is, there's only so many miles of good shoreline, either inland or on the shore. And there's only so much space. And as that real estate gets bought up, right? Or even if it's available that it's not well maintained, I even ask people, right, if I'm coming up to fish, is it okay if I park by the side of the road? Because there literally is no parking, or Google it ahead of time. Be like, oh, there's parking here, or a lot of stuff I pass, you should see my truck. It looks like a Bass Pro Shop because I have everything stacked up nicely. But when I go out into the woods, I have like a tiny little deck pack. I try to pack light because often I'm walking from my car, 5-10 minutes down. I don't have a boat. I'd like one. But I know for some of the more traffic lakes, right, where it is becoming a problem. It's not just you need a boat. It's you may have the boat, you may have the kayak, but through reasons that are no fault of your own, you just cannot get down to the water. And I've always wondered if it's more of an East Coast thing just because of the sheer size and the age of it, right? But you guys though have that on the West Coast and down south, right? But it just might not be as concentrated, right? Because I mean, you see the size of New Jersey. It's like this big. It could fit in the corner of Wyoming. I mean, I'll be honest here. It's a tiny, East Coast is like a tiny little state. So I think the pressure on accessibility, and I also think of stepping back from just getting down to the waterway, right? Like if you are truly disabled, it would be hard for you there because like if I can't get down to the water and I'm an able-bodied woman who's willing to fall on her ass a couple I mean, I can see where it's even worse, right? Like, but I'd be curious though if you guys have that same problem, like is getting down to the water like easy
So
for you guys?
for me, I would say yes. The less popular lakes and rivers, no, it is not. It is not easy, especially if you go creek fishing. Now, I know creeks are creeks and they're just runoffs and all this other stuff. But if you want to go fish a good creek, be prepared to go hiking because you're not going to get to it. There's literally just no way to get to it. There's no parking.
Mhm.
It's they're so beautiful and they're so fun to actually take part of and fish, but you can't get to them. And some of the smaller lakes that people are like, oh, you can't fish there. Well, yeah, you can fish there. It's not private land. They just don't take the time to look it up, and they're like, oh, well, if you do fish there, you can't eat the fish. Well, it's fine. I'm catching and releasing. And by the way, Texas Game and Wildlife would tell me if I can't eat those fish and that the water was unsafe. So they just don't want people to fish in their spots. And that's part of the thing down here, especially in smaller southern towns. I say smaller. This is exponentially larger where I live now than where I did in Tennessee. And tight lips, especially in where I grew up in Tennessee. You know, we all fished, you know, the same places, but no one ever was like, hey, I caught him on this, or hey, this is kind of what pattern I picked up on. It's not, there's no sharing the wealth whatsoever. And that's the same thing here. It's just on a larger scale. Mm-hmm. But Brian, what about you, man?
So this has been the fight of the ages in the West, because we have so much public land here in the West. We have national forest, we have Bureau of Land Management, we have U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, state forest lands, Department of Fish and Wildlife lands. There's been a war basically at hand, and especially I'm going to coin the coastal area, because Oregon has laws in place, and I believe Washington does, and a few others. I could be incorrect, that all navigable waterways, and what they mean by a navigable waterway is one that can be used for commercial or industrial use. So you take the Columbia River. There is nowhere on the Columbia River that can be privately owned. It can be owned by the tribal consortiums and lands with the native tribes, or it is owned by us, the public. That river you can fish anywhere you want to, and it is a massive, it's a huge river. Then we also have our beaches, and because the ocean is a navigable waterway for commercial shipping, nobody can own the beach. Now, there's been people that have attempted to purchase sections of the beach where they think that they can own the beach, where people would be able to walk through, and they want to charge them with trespass. Now, there is a deadline, so you can't like cross the sand dunes into somebody's yard that's got an oceanfront property. By the way, I would never own an oceanfront property here with the danger of tsunami. It's just something I wouldn't do. But they literally own the tops of the sand dune, and so you can't go there. Now, inland rivers on the coast, those are not considered navigable waterways, so people can own all the way up to the stream bank. Some have strung fences through the middle of the river. Now, in New Jersey, I don't know if you have migratory fish species, maybe Atlantic salmon, something like that, but when these folks decided to drive fence poles and run barbed wire through these coastal rivers, they also impeded access for Chinook salmon, for steelhead, for chum salmon, pink salmon, all these other different salmon species that run. They destroyed the stream bed, but there was laws that were preventing anybody from carrying any other further action out. They did that so that boats could not go down the river, even though there were legal launch points upriver and legal takeout points downriver that were owned by the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Land and boundary in the West is a hotly contested issue. People died in the past because of it, because ranch lands, fighting over free grazing. I mean, there's people, they were getting hung in the 1800s out here for free grazing. So you'd have a group of folks that came through, and they would want to graze the open land that was thought to be publicly owned. Other cattle ranchers getting fights. They'd have big shootouts, everything else. Ranching and land ownership in the West has been a pretty major thing, more so now that our urban density is picking up, especially here in the Pacific Northwest. We've had a lot of people transit over. People like our Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Marine Board, actually our government agencies are far more involved with that aspect than even the private. But we have steelhead and salmon fishing associations, we have TU, we have all that, and there's been just a massive fight, and even with like Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever, you know, the National Wild Turkey Foundation, Ducks Unlimited. Now, Ducks Unlimited out here, because we have the Pacific Flyway, has been a big proponent of that. So the West is like the last stand fight for public stream access. And so because we've learned from what you experienced, Kathryn, that's what we don't want to have. And we have seen the toll of what stream bank development and agricultural development does to a lot of our river systems, and they are very sensitive. You will see a change very rapidly based on the type of commerce and industry that comes in around the river. So the West is this is a hotbed for public access, just because of how massive it is and all the access points. Right now, I could take you to 15 different rivers and we wouldn't have a problem getting down to the bank or fishing them. That's what it is. Lakes, same thing. It'd take you to 1,000 lakes and you'd be like, I didn't realize that, and these are lakes that are probably within a 30 square mile radius. I could take you to, 300-400 lakes in one area and no problem with access. So yeah, the West, it's vast, it's massive. A lot of it's inaccessible to a lot of people, just because of the sheer size and rugged terrain. But that's what we have out here.
I mean, maybe it's better that way. I mean, because we have a lot of, we're in New Jersey, right? We are right on a flyway, and I know I spent the summer on Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. My in-laws have a house, and that was a big contention issue with the wind turbines going up. I mean, I think I would rather have, and this is just me, I would rather have more organizations out there, even if they don't always work together, done, because it's, to your point, it's little things that make a huge difference. And it's little things not happening that make a huge difference. I mean, I think we have Shad Fest. I feel like that's closer to Pennsylvania. But to your point, if the West is dealing with it, the East Coast is already gone through it, right? We have, and I think because it's so small, right? Like you have the multi-million-dollar homes going up, and I could side with the property owners. Look, this is your land. You spent $1 million on it. By rights, you shouldn't have people going to it. But at the same time, if you think about the fishermen, and I go back to that lake, and I'll figure out where it's from. If your tax dollars and your fishing license dollars are going to stop that lake, to me, by law, the public should have access to it. But I think it's just a microcosm. I mean, what makes me feel slightly better about the East Coast is a lot of the industrialization and the damage that we have, right? The Superfund sites, the brown fund sites, I would be very hesitant to eat the fish where I am, purely because, I would literally walk along and find old bottles, like bottle dumps. I mean, it's just an old part of the country where you don't know what's leaching into the water. And I know they've done a lot of cleanup on that, but I feel like at least on the West Coast, only because it's younger, with the rail movement, things got shipped out west. I feel like it's a little more pristine. And that's where, if you can keep it untraveled, right, I would rather keep it that way. At the same time, right, your tax dollars, they do go for something somewhere. I mean, one thing that I was telling my husband about with the whole Pebble Mine, I said to him, remediation costs a lot. When people say, "Oh, I'll leave enough money for you," no, it's never enough. And that's why I'm hoping that we can block the mine entirely. But even something like that, right? To your point about stream bed damage has been shockingly fast. We have too many deer here. Like, it's causing runoff into the water. They're eating through the understory, right? Like, it really is a huge problem. It's things that you don't think would be detrimental that cause a problem. That's why I feel like the West Coast, you have so many more organizations, and I'm sure it's not perfect, but I feel like if we can prevent some of the East Coast damage from happening, and prevent, multi-million-dollar houses blocking the beaches, because they've been there for so long, they were grandfathered in. I think that's something to go for. And I think even in South, you have that opportunity because, again, it's much more undeveloped. But I think too, there's that economic cost, to that, because every time I think about, let's keep it clean, let's keep it open, if you're a rancher and you have to graze your cattle somewhere, like, where are they going to go?
Right.
I mean, that's one thing that I keep hearing about, right? With the fragmentation, like, even not just trout and salmon, but migratory animals, right? They have nowhere to go. Like, that's why in the fall, I said, husband, every East Coast newspaper you read, there's always at least once a month someone dying because of a deer, because the deer have nowhere to go. So,
Yep.
Going across an interstate, brown bears, are becoming a big problem in New Jersey because I think part of it is the climate change. They're probably waking up sooner, but it's it's a little crazy. You never know what you're getting. Well, I feel like on the West Coast, in parts of the South, you guys have more of a cushion. Not that you're not going to wake up and find a muley looking in your front window, but I can literally poke an eye out of a deer by opening my window some days. That's beautiful to see, but between deer ticks and hitting the poor things, I'd like a little more of a buffer zone, I mean, I'm sure you guys would have stories about what you find in your backyard.
Yeah. Yeah, the probably the biggest thing that we all face collectively is that access and the stream accessibility, the lake accessibility. And I think you touched on a very important point there where we have tax dollars going to the Department of Fish and Wildlife or Natural Resources. You have Pittman Robertson money that goes in from the tackle and the clothing and the gear that we buy and everything else. You have a large amount of money going into that. And then to have some water bodies that are actually managed by the public entities for those types of fishing and all that kind of stuff. That's really one of those things where we have a right to be able to fish that, but because of the way that some of the laws are written and everything else, that's the access gets cut off. And so I know that's going to be the war for the ages, and that's going to be the war for the ages in the West and in the South and the Midwest, everywhere. But yeah, the double-edged sword of that part is that out here, TU has actually partnered up with a lot of the ranchers, especially ranchers that own large swaths of land. When we talk about large land ownership, and John can probably attest to this down in Texas too, a cattle ranch can be 5,000 to 6,000 acres. We're talking about a ranch that's probably the size of the town that you live in New Jersey. And this is nothing but open range with like multiple watersheds. Some of them own part of mountains. And that's the whole thing. It's like, how can you own a mountain? And it's like, it's just a part of that agricultural development land out here. That's what it is. So a lot of effort's been put in to actually co-op and work with the ranchers. Now, the ranchers have other economic means that they make off of those as well. So they offer hunting. That's probably one of the biggest things out here in the West is that if you go to a cattle ranch, chances are if you can go hunt a cattle ranch, you are going to be very successful because the graze is managed. So there's a lot of grazing. So there's great ground and land management. The forests and the forest space are maintained exceptionally well because the rancher doesn't want their ranch to catch on fire and burn down. That's a real big hazard out here. But then also the stream banks are protected because Trout Unlimited, the Departments of Fish and Wildlife, Natural Resources, they go in and they actually work with the ranchers. They're like, hey, this little stream is a spawning habitat for wild trout. We need to protect it. We'll pay for this part when we'll send in a biologist. We just want to be able to come on your land and protect this. And the ranchers have been a lot better about that. And they're like, we'll subsidize wells so that you don't have to siphon off irrigation out of this creek. So we can actually put wells in. And there's been a lot of that type of work too. And I don't know, John, if you can talk to anything there in Texas or Tennessee, but that's been a major milestone in our habitat maintenance out here. And there might be some people who say, well, I've never got any help with that, and I've just taken care of it. And to them, I say good for you, because you really are protecting not only what you own in your resource, but what also discharges out. But John, is that kind of the same thing as Texas DNR doing that with a lot of their ranchers too, out in West Texas and all that?
Man, to be honest, I'm still really new to Texas. I'm not incredibly familiar with the conservation piece. I didn't even know what Trout Unlimited was until like 2 months ago. So
That's okay.
I do know there's an issue. We do have a systemic issue with some of our smaller watersheds here, just from agricultural runoff. It's completely destroying the fisheries that run through some of them. So I would imagine that Texas DNR or Game and Wildlife, they don't mess around. So I'd imagine they're doing something about it. Literally the most active, a big shout out to the park rangers and all of our game wardens here in Texas. They don't mess around. I've been checked so many times. Tennessee, I had literally never been checked ever. And I fished some incredibly popular lakes and rivers. Never once got checked. And here in Texas, I swear it was like every 2 weeks or so, I was getting stopped and checked. I was like, man, that's really annoying. And then I grew up a little bit about it, and I thought about it a little bit more than just being checked by the game warden. And I was like, they're preserving our land is what they're doing. So I would imagine that, Game and Wildlife and all of our other recreational Texas facilities, I'd imagine they're doing something about it, but I don't know that, but that's my thoughts on it anyway.
I feel like, especially with trophy deer hunting, that it's first, it is a big money maker, right? I mean, and I know there's an argument going on with the chronic wasting disease, right? Like I think no one kind of knows where it came from. I mean, rumor is that it started from maybe, I don't know, farm deer, because anytime you congregate animals together, unfortunately, for better or for worse, one, purely from the number of coyote kills around here, you change the predation patterns. And two, I think it's easier to transmit diseases. I know New Jersey is very stern on like not feeding the deer. I mean, but again, for us in such a tight, fragmented environment, you don't want deer crossing more roads than they already do, But I think when you think about game management, it could be grouse, it could be deer, it could be fish. I think once people start to realize that, again, this is me saying, to your point, it's money. You're not going to get a nasty river because your deer are cropping everything down, and you have enough deer, and also you have enough management around it that your runoff isn't going into the water, your farms aren't burning down. I think it's a win-win for everyone, and I feel like, I don't want to say it's a lack of education, because I think a lot of people already know this, but I don't know if it's incentivized the right way, right? Like, I mean, for where we are, one of our Audubons has so many deer that I think as part of the 5-year management plan, you can draw a lottery and you can come onto a New Jersey wildlife site and you can hunt. And that's the one time it's closed, and as my husband says, you see people with trucks and they kill a lot of deer, but they've had to, because I mean, it's totally deforested. But that's kind of part of the problem living in such an urban built up environment. Like, from my end, I mean, and I love animals, we need more hunters. It's just, where I live, we're lucky that we're sandwiched between a major road and a canal. So if the deer wanted to, when it gets low enough, they can jump over and go the other way, but their populations are kept in check because we also have very active coyotes. We're lucky where they're not starving to death, they're not overgrazing, they're not cropping things down much, but that's where I think where you guys have a little more space and you have that management, I do feel like well-managed hunting plays a big part in keeping a healthy environment. Unfortunately, where we are, there's just not enough space to hunt deer freely. I mean, I'd love to do that, but we just can't. Like, the chances of you, popping someone by accident, popping your deer are too high. But I feel like when it's managed together, right, Ducks Unlimited working with, and it's not the Quality Deer Management, I think they changed the name, the Deer Management Association working with Trout Unlimited, if you're the kind of person who says, well, what's in it for me? Well, there's a lot of money. Like, people will pay like tens of thousands of dollars to bag a trophy buck. If some of that money can then go to keep the trout in the city moving, I'm all for it. I just feel like Unfortunately, where we are, you don't have that opportunity because the land is just too built up. But I feel like, especially where you're, Brian, on as well, right? Like people have realized that there's a lot of money that can be made, to keeping the environment clean and accessible. I wish it was a lesson that we had all seen earlier, right? Instead of, where I am, where heavy manufacturing alone is taking a big toll on the health of the environment, that I feel like we kind of miss that opportunity where I feel like as we move further west and down south, it could be a lesson learned.
Yeah, that to kind of echo the sentiment of hunting. So one thing is that in that respect, hunting isn't like catch and release fishing, and it's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, especially in respect to cultures, right? So you have a culture of people, people love to see live wildlife. They love to see live deer, live elk, live bison, and wolves and coyotes, and fox and everything else. But this is where it gets difficult for a lot of folks. Is on one hand, we want to have this place to live. We want to have a place to live where we can be convenienced and have opportunity, commerce, and industry where we can make money and we can live and be productive in our society. And then on the other hand, we want the outdoor utopia where it's like watching a Disney movie, and there's birds and animals and fish, and they're jumping around and singing and having a great time. The harsh reality is that one species is going to have to outcompete the other in order to survive. Well, humans, we're pretty ingenuitive, right? We can figure out ways to survive without like encroaching on another species. However, where you're at there, you have a large population of white-tailed deer. White-tailed deer breed prolifically. They breed far faster and harder than we get mule deer or Colombian blacktail, which is what we have out here. And so there's a lot more deer. And to not be able to effectively hunt those deer and rely on public resource to manage those deer in a way of culling the herd, and then throw on top of it crossed over chronic wasting disease, which I think you were right. There were farm deer, but I think that it was a crossover in a feedlot from cattle because of mad cow disease into that cervid population. I don't know. It had something to do with hooved animals, and so they had some kind of cross up. It freaks people out west because we haven't had a lot of confirmed cases of CWD, but they are watching it like a hawk, and especially in areas where we have active cattle ranching, and you have like Rocky Mountain elk, and you have Roosevelt elk, and you have mule deer, and then you have domestic bovine, and even equine, horses and stuff like that. They're really watching that whole dynamic, and they're kind of freaking out. They're like, hey, we don't know who's hanging around what, cattle guzzler and what water hole and everything else, because how do you manage it? 8, 9, 12,000 acres of ranch land. You don't know what's going to be at what feedlot and all that. But we have to have that wildlife management aspect in there. And there's two ways it can be done. Like you said, one way is let the DNR manage, or to let the public manage. And it's just like with a fishery. You can get overpopulated on one species of fish in a real hurry, especially a predatory species. And if everybody's perception is like, well, the water's bad, so the fish are bad, when that may or may not be the full case, you're going to have a little bit of a mixed perception. So I can understand the chronic wasting disease. I can also understand, culturally speaking, where you're going to have some limitations on people being hesitant to go out and harvest an animal based on their perception. And the same thing goes with fish, right? People don't want to hurt and kill something, which is what it really comes down to. It's like, we don't want to hurt and kill something and watch it suffer to death. And it's like, there's a part of me that I empathize with those people that have that perception. But then there's another part of me that says, what would you rather have? Would you rather see a deer get shot through the center body mass with an arrow or a shotgun or a rifle, or watch it get its rear quarter hit with a truck and struggle off the road with its 2 good feet and ball to death over in the ditch. I kind of think about that in that respect. And then also watch the deer's hindquarter go through somebody's windshield and potentially decapitate
No.
them or break their face, or cause them to wreck their vehicle. And then you have a bunch of injured passengers, you have a wounded deer. You can control the mitigating circumstance or you can't. It's one of those trade-offs. I don't want to go too far off track, but we're talking about conservancies and things like that, and I believe that all animals are beautiful in their own right, and they're fun to watch, and they're fun to observe, and they're fun to interact with, responsibly. But there's also that management aspect too. I think that's, wow. It's such a loaded topic, and there's a lot of people who are really passionate ways on it. I know in
It
Texas,
is, but I think it's easily, you can polarize it though. That's why, right? I mean,
right.
and I think too, right? Once you get outside for it, right? I do feel like if you're willing to keep your mind open, and you see, again, coming from iron, right, where I can be distracted by checking out some woodpeckers as much as I do fishing, right? Or, I just want to go out and do different things at the same time. If you have an open mind to it, then you start to realize, like, yeah, there's a reason why you find a lot of coyote kills. There's a reason why where I am, right? The deer population, it's bad, but they're not starving to death, and at the same time, what I don't want them to do either, right? Is, crossing over the canal a lot too, because I try to be also, when I go fishing, I try to be careful making my own access points, and again, deer can be horrifically destructive, they will destroy everything, and so if you want to, if you want to manage a nice fishery, you do have to think about everybody around it, I mean, speaking of fishing, last fall I found this poor little screech owl that had gotten snagged in fishing line in a tree, and I rescued it. It had to be put down at a wild rehab center, but it was going through a popper in a tree. I mean, you never know what's out there until you see it, right? Because I was like, oh my God, that poor owl, But then I realized it. And I was talking to the local animal, and he said this happens all the time. He said the good thing is you found it. Unfortunately, it had to be put down, but I was able to get it down. It was brought into the rehab center. But that's another case of where people are like, oh my God, I hate owls. I'm like, well, you have a lot of rats, mice, but even if I think about fish, right? Like we have a lot of invasive green sunfish around here, and they are vicious, and their mouths are just a little bit bigger than a bluegill. And I was told by my fish and wildlife, like if you catch them, do not release them. You gotta kill them. Like they breed like crazy, and that was probably someone's good intentioned idea, right? To make it more fun. When they're eating, they're out competing everybody, because their mouths are just big enough where they can target more food than a bluegill. I literally was fishing somewhere by the road, and I was like, holy crap. And then someone was like, but that's a green sunfish, they're invasive. And I'm like, but they're so much fun to catch. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, they're invasive, and it was an odd little waterway where maybe one had been let go by accident, and that part of me was like, well, why can't I move a couple cane pickerel over the train tracks and put them in there? But to your point, then you're throwing off the balance of it, right? Because it's a double-edged sword, and that's where one tiny thing, right, can mess up things for years to come. I mean, I've heard of like catfish in the Chesapeake, right? Like not that, what was it? Some of them were introduced recently, and the problem is, not all catfish are bottom dwellers. Some of them are kind of midwater. Big water ones are the ones that are eating everybody else. The good news is they're pretty tasty, but I feel like we've caused ourselves so many problems inadvertently by trying to make something, more attractive when then suddenly you're overrun with, predatory catfish and predatory sunfish. And I'd never think of panfish as predatory, but green sunfish, oh my gosh. Like I was shocked at how fierce they were and how much bigger their mouths were. So I can see where they could easily outcompete everybody else. It's like a little school of piranhas. I think my cat's trying to get into my room.
one of the
Look, like you, hold on, let me just see.
all
Yeah.
right.
No. Yeah, and mine's not as nice as yours, right? Like mine is a 13-pound former feral cat who like is, she doesn't know how to play nice. Let's just say that was one reason why I rescued her. Was one, I felt bad, and two, I like my birds outside. I like supporting wildlife. I figured that if I left this little feral kitten outside, all those nice, weird, birds that call New Jersey home for one season would not be coming back.
Two
But
of our
anyway, I digress.
two of our cats are rescues. We've got 4 cats here. Y'all have only had the pleasure of seeing one of my chunky ones, but we got 4. But trying to remember what I was going to say. That's okay. But I do have something now. So you got a skillful angler program. I was going to talk about invasive species, but we can get
Oh,
that
wait.
later. Yeah, you got a skillful angler award for a 9-inch sunfish, right?
And I guess if 5 of them, you get I don't know, a 5 for. Yeah,
That's
people
cool.
keep saying, I guess I thought, New Jersey does this, and basically, I'm going to be selfish here. I've yet to see a woman get the master angler, which is like 5 of one kind. So I have to catch 5 of them. I have 3 of them. I need 2 more. But that's the nice thing about New Jersey. Like New Jersey does do a good job. Anything I can do, but that's the thing. Anything I can do on my end, and I'm have to say, this state does this kind of cool thing. But for most people though, a 9-inch sunfish is nothing. That it just goes to show you, right? Like for us, a 9-inch sunfish, that's a good sized fish, right? For other people, they're probably, I get those every day in New Jersey. I'm like, whoa.
That was I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off there. That was another thing too that I really appreciated about something you said earlier. You said, and just now talking about the fish that you have near you, and you're appreciative of the size and what all fish are there. It's you keep you referred to trophy fish. I think about to sneeze. Hold on, I'm sorry. Let me mute my mic. Yeah, sure did. That was giant. Anyway, so being appreciative of the species you have right on your doorstep really is fantastic. Bryce Miller, I spoke about that maybe a month and a half ago. I was on my high horse in my soapbox for a little bit, about not every river is going to be that blue ribbon river, but that doesn't mean it's not your blue ribbon river or stream or watershed or canal or pond or mud puddle. It's it if it holds fish and you enjoy the fishing there, it doesn't matter how big the fish is. And we were talking about all these perceptions of all these people that are just holding these absolute giant fish on Instagram and whatnot. But I know that if I go fish the man-made lake, I say man-made lake, it's been taken care of. It's a spring-fed lake, but the fish aren't huge in it. They drained everything 2 years ago. I've literally, as soon as I moved here to Texas, they had just finished redoing the entire lake. It's surrounded by, parks, and the fish aren't huge in it. But I know that a panfish the size of my hand is giant there, and I appreciate that fish playing with me for that day. So I think that's a fantastic mindset to have, that you're not pushing like, oh well, this isn't really a big fish. You're enjoying every catch. Luke Duncan, whether or not people like him or not, that's up to you. But he says something. He says you have one life, fish it well. And I think that's a really great mindset, and just that speaks volumes. And that short phrase, it really speaks volumes for just appreciating what you have right next to you. So I think that's really awesome. And you spoke about Tenkara, and a couple things here. You don't just fly fish. You don't just fly fish. You don't just spin fish. You're an all-encompassing angler, excuse me. But one thing I thought was unique is you can spot them from a mile away. You have some of Nick Feller's flies. NorCal Tenkara. I saw some of his
Oh my
flies.
God.
Yeah,
He gave me a couple.
yeah, that's
I don't
awesome.
even know. I don't even know how I to your point about like meeting people on Instagram, right? Like I got on it before. Oh my God. It's hold on. It's like Godzilla. I see the paw. She's like, mommy, come in. Honey bunny. Come on. Come on. Anyway, no, I got into Tenkara because I really have bad wrists. And I think I said to my husband once, I don't like to spend more than $100 on a fishing rod. And I was like, oh, Tenkara is great. And I was like, I don't need a reel, so I can spend more money on the rod. So that it was a horrifically, then I realized I was probably spending more than I needed to. But I mean, I like to be well-rounded. I also realized too, like it's good. Oh, honey, can you feed her? Honey. Yeah, my cat. Go talk to her. Oh yeah, see, she just cares about food. I can see anyway. I get that. She gets I caught her one day where I was trying to not feed her early, and I said to her, I'm sorry. I said it's too early. Go talk to dad. When she went up to my husband. She's like, hi, honey. So mom said no. Can I? I'm like, what the? Anyway, no, I think it's good to be well-rounded. It's more fun that way. And also, I'm the kind of person who will take her flies and put them on my spinning rod. You just have to use a lighter pound test, and either you have to have a heavier bobber or a little bigger to be able to get the weight. But I gotta say, it works pretty well because I'm like, why should I not use my flies all year? And people are like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I have Nick's little I took his his little mixes, and I'll just put them on my spinning reel, longer line, put either a little lead free BB or put a bobber on. You can cast him pretty well. I mean, I prefer top water because where we are, it's so easy to snag. The number of times, and I've gotten better, but the number of times I lose stuff in, either in the trees or 9 times out of 10, I'll just get the lower back, but I'll see the bobber go drifting away. I think it's good to be diverse, because I do admit, like the one trout I caught, but I didn't. I was trying to get a nice picture on it. It was a rainy day, and it unhooked itself, and slowly rolled down the riverbank and said bye. Some things are best targeted with fly rod. And John, that was horrible. It was a pouring rainy day. I was like, I'll go out and fish, and I had this gorgeous, what looked like a rainbow trout, and I'm all excited, and I'm reeling it in, and trying to get back up the bank, and it's wet, and I'm falling, and the fish just released itself. And I was like, someday I'll get, a trout, and they literally stalk it down the street for me. But anyway, I think it's good to try different things too, right? Because a lot of, talking about the giant fish on Instagram, right? Like kind of like Bart Lombardo said to me once, because I made this comment about that when I first started fishing. I remember I said something to him in Orvis, like, I really want to get a bass. And he's like, you can't, he's like, but what about panfish? I'm like, yeah, but I want a bass. And he was like, but panfish are just as fun to fight. And the more I started fishing, to your point about enjoying everything, I'm like, look, as long as I'm catching something on, some rod, on some reel, I personally realized, and it took maturity, like me 2 years ago would have been like, I just want a big rock bass. But nowadays I'm like, you know what? It's nice to get a panfish, because now I've started matching them up. Oh, is it a male? Is it a female? But I think too, it's like you said, John, you have to mature, you have to diversify your set, because fly fishing is great, but at the same time, I've heard more than a couple people like, what, more people who fly fish spin fish for whatever reason, they just focus on fly fishing, given how expensive that stuff is, and then most of my fly fishing stuff, I find these random sellers on Etsy or eBay who, do a discount, or I'm a big shopper of overstocks. The downside of it is I got this great Lamson reel, and because it was like discontinued, it took me about another year to finish school. It was horrible. And I was like, oh, it's a great deal. Then I'm like, oh, I want another spool. And then Lampson's like, I'm sorry. They were like, but that was on the closeouts for a reason. It took me, I think, about another 9 months. You know what I mean? You talk about fishing on a budget, I am your thing, I'm kind of picky about some of my stuff purely from the money spent, but at the same time, like trout magnet, I love that stuff. Joseph Melly was like, you got to try trout magnet. It took me a while to figure out how to make it up a casket, but those it's pretty cheap. I'm not gonna say no to trying something new. And I think too, being on a budget, like makes you be super picky. And that's one reason why, to diverge a little bit, I set a time myself, because I just was going through so many squirmies, because I like little squirmies. And John, you sent me this awesome little yarn one that I want to try. Like,
Oh,
to me, a little squirmy. What did you send me? The little video?
So I think I either sent you an overhand worm or I sent you a furled worm, one of the two.
It was a furled one.
Oh yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
was cool
Yeah.
because the fish around me, they love worms. Like, that's where at my little unlimited picnic, I was sight fishing with Stu, and he was like, I saw a bass over there. And so I had one of his spinning rods, and I put a little trout magnet worm on it. I threw it over. I got a bass right away. That's why I know some people are like, oh, but it's trout magnet. I'm like, dude, you want to catch a fish? I'm like, get a bright orange worm. For whatever reason, the fish around here love orange because the water is so dark. I think there's a lot of dead vegetation, like it's tannic, so that's where, to me, I don't care what it is, right? To your point, again, me a couple years ago would have been like, oh my God, no, I just don't want to do that. I need to use like a different kind of whatever, me 2 years later is like, it's a bass, oh my God, it's awesome. Like, I don't care if it's $25. I don't care if it's a feather or one of my toys, right? But I think there is some maturity to that. And I think the blessing of social media is there's so much more out there, but at the same time, when you see people with these giant fish, what they don't say is, they probably broke 6 rods getting to that fish. Like, I was talking to someone on Instagram, and he went fishing for ray. And he says he had this massive ray, and he said he made the mistake of asking someone to hold the rod, and the ray broke and got away. That's where, too, what you see all these great pictures on Instagram of catches, you don't see how many failed attempts they were. You see someone with a massive, pike. They probably don't say how many times they cast it out. The pike's like, meh, so it's kind of, I like to dig a little deeper, right? Like, and that's why I think, to your point, the comment section, I've learned from that too, just weeding through the comments, but also the people who respond back. Those are the people I usually end up following, because 9 times out of 10, once people realize that you truly are interested, and I get my fair share of trolls too. I think enough people are happy to share that knowledge, and I've learned a lot, just this short time we've been on social media, because I never was a big social media person until I was like, you know what, I can get a lot of tips out of that, and my husband said being a biology major, that probably has helped too, right? But just meeting people, hearing people's feedback, and okay, some people might say you lower your bar. I mean, I realize I don't have a bar. I'm happy getting any fish. Even if it's a teeny little. I thought it was a bass. I was fishing in these holes by me, and something kept jumping up, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna get that bass someday. And I found out a couple weeks later it was a baby pickerel. Damn thing was jumping out of the water.
Yeah.
It was literally this thing. And I have it on my Instagram page. I was all excited. Like, I remember I said to my husband, I'm like, oh, there's a bass out there. I know it because it's jumping. I'm like, it's not a panfish, because panfish pop and then they jump. So I was all excited, and I was reeling it in, and I get this little tiny snot pickerel about the teeny little pickerel. And I was like, dude, it was like, what's up? So, had it been me 2 years ago, I would have been like, God damn it, I wanted a bass. But I was like, oh my God, like, Lulu was like a snot pickle, like a little tiny little pickle. And I was like, oh my God, that's so good. But I guess, being open-minded and having, some maturity on it, I wasn't like, God damn it, it wasn't a bass. I was like, oh, I got a baby pickle. And it was pissed off at me. It was fighting. Like, I'd be surprised. Like, people always like, why are you barehanding everything? Well, first of all, like, my hands are so small. Buying any sort of fishing glove is difficult, right? Like, I probably sent so many back to Amazon that I kept. So I barehand everything. 9 times out of 10, it's because like speaking about accessibility, right? I am so sure that most nets, like I can't wear a net. I usually stick it down a boot if I'm wearing my muck boots. So I barehand everything because my hands are the only thing I have. So, all the fish I've caught, there's always that one that got away. Like I know there was a big bass somewhere with a trout magnet. I hope he's dropped it by now. But I do think it's a valid point, right, Sean? Like you see everyone, I call it the squish fish. They're like, I got it. Their hands are probably like numb. They're like, nah. But you don't hear the story behind
Yeah.
it, right? Like they've taken so long to get it, versus someone who's like celebrating like in a day fishing and you're about to like go home and you get this tiny panfish and you're like, yay!
Mhm.
It's not a total day.
You know,
I think that's important.
it is. It's crucial to, I'd even say a part of that self-care aspect of fishing for a lot of folks. If you set these false expectations for yourself, I did the other day. I'm not gonna spot burn this lake or this river, but I'll let you know. You said trout magnet, and that's what these guys were slaying it out on. By the way, were trout magnets, and I'm not going to talk about colors or anything like that because this is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been, and Brian and I were talking about it, and it needs to stay that way to an extent. So if you find it, enjoy it. If you don't, then maybe someday down the road I'll fill you in. But they they were killing on trout magnets. But I was there for I fished probably about 9.5 hours, and the first 5 hours of my day I didn't get a bite. And then we had 4 other people on the river beside me, and they were catching fish left and right on trout magnets. And I was a brute stock, by the way. We're talking like 18 to 20 inch rainbow trout, like
Whoa.
giants, the biggest trout I've ever seen in my life. And I was really disappointed in myself. I was like, why can I not figure this out? So anyway, I watched this guy hook this fish, and I was like, hey man, that's a big fish. I told him because I wasn't going to be like, hey man, stop bullying that fish. You're going to break off. I wasn't about to tell this guy how to fish, but I let him know because I saw it because I was further up than he was. I was like, that's a big fish. And he's like, no, it's not that big. I was like, do you want my net? And he said, no, I'll be fine. And long story short, this is like a 20-inch rainbow trout. And I had a net. He didn't have a net. And he was trying to get it in his hands and it came off. But, it's, but at the same time, as I was watching him do that, I had one of my flies out. It was a dry fly, and I hear the water just break. So I set. I wasn't even watching, and I ended up with this beautiful 15-inch brown trout, the biggest trout I've ever caught in my life, and it was a brown. So it was fantastic.
I saw that.
It was awesome, and that was if I had to catch one fish, because by God, I would have went to that little pond back here in Texas and fish for panfish for the rest of the day, just so I could regain a sense of what it felt like to have one on the end of the line. But I was so thankful for that fish. And I say this a lot, as you're growing as an angler, the first phase of it is you want to catch a fish, and then you want to catch a big one. And then after you catch your big one, you want to catch a lot. And then that final stage is more of you're just happy to be out there with the fish. You don't have to catch the big one. You don't have to catch a lot of them, but typically you want to catch one, to kick off the skunk. But
I hate getting skunked. It's almost like getting skunked in shed hunting. Like depending on the year, like my husband, I would find multiple sheds. Now in hindsight, some of them probably had been there for years, and I just happened to find it. But it is depressing when you come home empty-handed. But at the same time, right? Like if I can learn something from it, like, and it's interesting what you said about trout magnet, because I feel like and people have said this too, it depends so much on what, like seasonally, the pattern, the color, that kind of thing, or what worked for you this year, the fish might not give a damn next year. There's so many factors that we don't know. I mean, someone said to me once, the more time you spend watching and listening and just observing, the better off you be. But John, I agree with you. If you hear a plot, like you throw it out there, 9 times out of 10 you're gonna get something. Like that's called that sucker. And I love what, I don't know if you guys have them where you are, but to us, like they're almost like a catfish, but tiny little barbels. No, but they're very bottom dwellers, and they're kind of cool because I've watched it from afar, and I've always wanted to catch one, and they're good size, but I just see them kind of going under the water in little packs. And I was out one day fly fishing, and I thought someone was pranking me because there was such a loud splash. I was like, what? Who did this? I was like, dude, someone has to be throwing something because it was a quiet day,
Mhm.
and I was about to give up. So I'm like, you know what? There's a little eddy I like to fish. So, hooked my little trout bag. It was a hellgrammite, which makes a water bug in the spring, and I got that sucker. But I literally thought someone was pranking me because I kept hearing this massive splash. I was like, dude, someone must be throwing a brick around here. I'm like, what the? So I'm like, I was about to go home, right? But I'm like, okay, I'll cast it out. And it was a sucker. It must have been really hungry because I've never seen them off the bottom of the water, right? But it's sometimes, when you think you look on, right? It's like you just stop and you listen, and you might not be a fish, right? Like I've really been like in the middle of deer fights, I've seen otters screaming by, I think that's one thing I've noticed that people appreciate on Instagram, at least a lot of the people I follow, right? They're not just fishing, they're hunting, they're, sightseeing, right? Like I said to my husband, like, Nick, he likes to try to find those old glass insulators off railroads. I said to my husband, I'm like, every time I post about this old bottle I found or something, I was like, I come home and my Instagram page is like full of stuff, or I'll get texts from people and they're like, I don't know if you got this. No, I'm still coming down the mountain, but I wanted to show you these awesome bottles I found. And my husband was like, he was talking to his mom and he was like, I don't know how she does it. He was like, there are hundreds of people who follow her on Instagram for shed antlers and old bottles. And I was like, and I'll get you an old bottle. But it was hysterical because it kind of looks back to what we're talking about, right? Like if you keep an open mind, and I'm dying, right? Like, and it's like one of my friends, this is old, one of the older ones,
Wow.
Prohibition,
Oh
1927.
wow.
Yeah.
I cleaned this one. I almost broke it. I think I cried because it took me about 5 hours digging out. You can see it's hand glass. The rumor was in New Jersey, because it's all mobbed up, you had people bottling cider, right? And you will see that. And people would come to the distillery, and maybe a crate of your cider, went missing because all the bottles say not for resale.
Mhm.
So to me, I think if you can switch gears, right? Be it if you're shed hunting or if you're fishing or if you find something, like some of the best birders I've known actually are fishermen and fisherwomen, because you're out there so long, right? Like there were some guys I follow, I'm on a birding Facebook in New Jersey. He actually is a killer fisherman too. And I was like, wait, you're not the same Sammy who's on like Central New Jersey birding Facebook page. He's like, yeah, it's me. I'm like, the hell, man. And I'm like, you're killing it on the birding board. You're also killing it on the fishing board. And he was like, yeah, but I just love to get out there. And I was dying because it makes sense though, right? Like holistically, if you're listening, you're watching, and John, I think you're right. It kind of takes the sting off of coming home empty-handed, right? Like, although again, the bottle fascination of mine, my husband just dies because he's like your Instagram followers. And I'm like, yeah, my Instagram followers are so pure. I'm like, I'll get these old bottle pictures, deadhead pictures, fish pictures that Instagram, Facebook are flagging as graphic, rightfully so. Or you have Nick and he's like, I want to get an insulator. And me being me, I'm like, well, can't you? I'm like, but can't you like put a little net under it? And he's like, Kathryn, he's like, the railways would kill me. And I'm like, oh, you're right. I'm like, I hope you're not too close to the train tracks, but I feel like everyone I've met, has I'm gonna say a side job, but everyone I've met has an interest beyond it. And I almost feel like, again, it's probably sharing, but it's also keeping an open mind, right? Like I was telling Nick once, like I track in the wintertime and I could actually follow a coyote chase going after the deer. And you could see where the deer were getting driven up over the train tracks into the deep snow where more coyotes were waiting. And he said something like, it's so awesome to see that. I'm like, yeah, I bet you see something similar too. 'Cause I feel like if you've been outside long enough, like you're seeing fishing skills, like just watching and listening, it can go into so many other ways,
Mhm.
That's where I feel like Instagram isn't funny little community, right? Because that's how we met, But at the same time, I feel like too, I like seeing that fishermen and fisherwomen and hunters, they're doing something different other than just fishing and hunting. And I feel like too, like, I think if people saw that it's not just about the big one now, it's like, look, I found a wicked cool bottle. I feel like if more people open-minded like that, that there's a treasure out there that might not be that big bass, I feel like it would make all of us of conservation so much easier, right? But it's again, it's tricky, because everyone does want that big fish. I want that big fish.
Yeah.
You want that big fish,
Mhm.
I also want that big deer antler, right? But it's nice to see that like people are diversifying themselves. And I mean, knock on wood, I think too, the pandemic, I mean, in New Jersey, it was awful. Like I've lost many people, but at the same time, I think it kind of forced people, in a bad way to look inward and to see what else is out there. And I'm probably going to get yelled at for saying this, right? Because I never would want to get this to happen to anyone, right? But I do feel like for better or worse, the pandemic did change our mindsets. Some of us, what else is out there? I mean, I've never seen so many people on the trails by my house, and people just outside enjoying themselves, alone fishing, people walking, I think it's good, you know, and I feel like too, right? Like if you are a conservation organization out there, or even if you're the local Fish and Wildlife or the DNR, like this is a moment to capitalize on it too. Because I think people are like, oh my God, like I can't go anywhere, But if I open my window and I see all this stuff, kind of a blessing in disguise, as I'm, unhooking myself, from the trees, But I know at least I'm not
Yeah.
alone. I know you guys are out there too. You're like, oh, getting something down from a tree. Like I've gotten these really weird looks where because of that little owl, it made me so much more aware of like getting stuff down from the trees. Also, I'm cheap. Like if then it's always the thing that I've worked so hard to tie that I get
Mhm.
stuck in the tree, right? It's not like my 25-cent trout magnet. It's always like the nice fly, right?
Yeah.
And then when Nick sent me that little box of flies, he was like, Kathryn, it's okay if you lose them. I'll make you more. I'm like, no, but I don't, because I know how long it took to make those, right? Like I would literally like dive into the canal to get back my stuff because I just don't want it to sag anything. But also I'm like, if I lose that squirmy, I'm gonna have to tie more. I mean, that's what taught me how to tie. I just got tired of going to Orvis and buying more, you know. My husband was like, you probably spent more money getting everything together. But I realized too, I can tie my own little patterns, I can make it more palatable for the fish.
Mhm.
You know, that's the nice thing about keeping an open mind and learning something new, to your point about self-care, Brian, like especially
Mhm.
nowadays, right? Like you do have to focus on yourself, and I feel like it may be, pre-pandemic me would have been like, oh my God, you can't leave, your son and your husband, for the morning by themselves. But now I'm like, you know what? I'm like, feed the cat, feed yourself.
Mhm.
I'm like, that's how my son earns his allowance, by the way, is feeding the cat. Although she's conned him into multiple feedings before. I've literally gotten downstairs and he's like, I fed her. I'm like, but I fed her this morning too.
Mhm.
He's like, oops, that's why she's overweight, but I think it's made us realize that we can serve ourselves, and it's okay to get outside. And maybe too, right? Like I think it's that initial fear, right, of going outside. Like I I used to be. I still am very afraid of the dark, but I've literally made myself go night fishing sometimes just to show me that like it's okay. Although the chances of me falling and breaking an ankle are incredibly high. But I think getting outside has kind of forced me to reassess my boundaries too. And it's also made me realize, and again, like you said, John, it's maturity, right? Like I kind of want to give the world a better place, purely just for me, right? But I kind of want other people to be able to get out there too. Yeah, and I know that other people feel the same way. Like Brian talked about the land force, and how the West Coast is trying to learn from East Coast mistakes. I think other people and even other countries, right? Like I know the United States is like the richest country in the world, but other countries too are trying to learn from our mistakes, right? Like you have the tiger preserves in India, you know, or the panda sanctuaries in China. Like everyone wants to do something, and I think too people have realized that like there's only one planet. You know, I mean, it's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go to Texas. Well, oh yeah, Texas, where are you gonna go? I'm gonna go to Oregon. Okay, well, you could you can keep going, but you know, I think land management and water management is, to your point, it's going to be the water wars. It's going to be the
Mhm.
land wars, not just because we need water and climate change is forcing the weather patterns to change, but you know, it's accessibility, to your point. It's irrigation. You know, that's one reason why we have so much trouble with preservation, right? Is as the water levels drop, it's because we consume so much water.
Mhm.
You know, I feel like there's a day of reckoning ahead, and I kind of want to be on the right side of that and helpful. But again, you know, there's only so much one person can do. So I'm just happy that you guys let me come on and talk about it, because I feel like we could talk for days and solve all the problem world. You know, like
Yeah.
I every now and then, like some of my friends and I, one of them was like, "Can we just come over and get a bunch of beers?" Like, and you know, he's like, "We solve the problems of the world." I was like, "I know, unfortunately, I'm
Well,
not that wealthy enough to work." But
and
I appreciate it. You know, you guys inviting me on because it makes it better so I'm not alone.
so yeah, you know, and we appreciate you being on here and really sharing your passions about these really important topics, because I don't think that we as anglers, as outdoors people, we're obviously very aware of our outdoor surroundings. Every time we go out, we're seeing something a little bit different with the with where we go, whether you know the stream bed changes after a flood, or you know extreme temperature differentials, whether that's extreme freezing or extreme heat. You know, the way that trees fall, the way that the wildlife interacts, and the way that we see things, it's always changing. And I think it's an important thing to be cognizant of all of those changes, especially since we do spend so much time outside. And I think at the forefront of really recognizing that um, things are changing, whether you like it or not, or believe it or dispel it, you know, opinion, fact, however, you know, our listeners want to paint this whole picture. Things are changing, whether it's changing because of the weather and the climate, or it's changing because of development and industry. Things are changing all the time, and we need to all be involved in helping to preserve what we have left. That doesn't mean that we're going to stop development. That does not mean that we're going to get rid of agriculture or industry, but we need to look at smarter ways to do these things. That's the bottom line. We're you know, the unnecessary evils of an industrialized society. We are going to need oil for the foreseeable future. We are going to need
Mm.
chemicals for the foreseeable future. We are going to need roadway infrastructure for the foreseeable future. We're going to have tires. We're going to have engines. We're going to have vehicles and transportation and all this other stuff. And there's no way to
Mm.
get away from it. You're not going to load a grocery store's worth of cargo onto a bicycle. You can put it in the back of a semi.
I'd like to.
A lot of people would. I fully agree with that. You can put it in the back of a semi that's powered by natural gas, which is better, but we're still drilling for it, right? We all have to hit our happy medium, and we need to know that we're all working towards making things better. We started at a certain point, and we're continuing to work towards that. And probably one of the biggest things, if I interject once again with my own opinion, is rather than fight each other and say you're completely wrong and I'm completely right, why don't we get together and share our ideas and see what we can work towards together, versus being so separate? Because we see the separatism in angling, we see the separatism in hunting, we see the separatism in wildlife viewing and perceptions. You belong to Trout Unlimited and the Audubon Society. If I was to look at that from the outside, I would almost say that's like peanut butter and ketchup, because on one hand, Trout Unlimited promotes the legal keeping and take of trout where it's legal to keep and take. The Audubon Society, basically, from my perception, is a conservation group. Conservation groups, depending on which conservation group you're looking at, some they don't want anybody in the woods. They don't want anybody near any wildlife whatsoever. They're like, you see wildlife, you treat it like, like you just saw the light of, some religious figure, and you run the opposite direction, and you don't breathe on it, don't look at it, don't blink, don't cough on it. That's some conservation groups. But other conservation groups realize that, our species has been here a long time, and so has a lot of these animals, and we've coexisted. It's just that now we're getting certain populations and certain strains and certain, genetic strains of animals that are more tightly together. So it's fascinating to me to meet you and talk to you about that idea of, I go out and I interact with the wildlife on multiple different levels. From the angling aspect, I love these fish and I love the habitat that they're in enough to want to make a concerted effort to protect them. But I also love and appreciate the animals that are around the habitats that I'm trying to protect enough to respect their entomology and their life and their habitat. And I think that that's such it's an incredible thing, because so many other people, it almost turns into a war zone. The people are like, oh, that deer is trampling that, let's shoot all the deer. Well, you can't do that. You can't, because they're a part of that ecosystem. That balance of the ecosystem is there. The owl, I think owls are awesome. I want to see more owls. We're finally getting good raptor rehabilitation in the West after years and years of not seeing anything. We finally have nesting bald eagles hanging out, and we have ospreys hanging out, and we have red-tailed hawks, and we have kestrels and American, all kinds of different, species. Great horned owls. I was driving home from fishing. There was one perched up on a wire. It's super cool. It's like, oh wow, there's
I
that.
love those.
Yeah, it's like perched up on a wire above a field hooting. It's like, all right, cool. There's Mr. Hoot Owl. He's up there on the wire. I love watching them. Or you talk about like barred owls, and you start talking to a barred owl, and they'll talk back to you back and forth. And pretty soon you got like 15 or 20 of them in the yard, and the kids are freaking out because they're like, are these things, but that's what they are. Having that, having that holistic respect for the wildlife, I think that's just so cool. I know we're
But I think
probably,
you have to have an open mind, though. And
Well-
Brian, I honestly didn't think that about myself with you brought up, because the Massachusetts Audubon was created because, if you think about, again, these like DDT, Rachel Carson, like all that pesticides, right? Like, to your point, getting raptors and eagles back, that was a big deal. But also, years ago, people used, I think there was a kid's book by the Massachusetts Audubon, and it was like they were wearing dead birds on their heads. Like, so many birds were hunted to extinction just to be feathers on people's heads. And the Massachusetts Audubon was like, to your point, like, wait a minute. And I think to this day, they're separate from the National Audubon because they're very powerful and they're strong. But it is holistic, right? Like, to me, you can't not do that, because you can't, you have to find that line, but you have to accept that, yes, for someone or something to succeed, something will be sacrificed, right? But if you think about it to the greater good, and I think that's where people, and even ourselves, right? Like, if you don't have that open mindset, you're not gonna be able to see that balance, right? Like, I don't want to shoot the deer, but I will shoot them if I have to, right? Like, I don't want to kill those green sunfish, but I will if I have to. I think it's just so easy to be polarized and say, well, killing animals is bad. Well, yeah, but you're going to get chronic wasting disease, which, knock on wood, I don't think Jersey has had a confirmed case yet, but they've said it's a matter of time. I mean, you have to be able to be open-minded, be like, for the health of the environment, like, I'm sorry, like, that sick part of gear will have to go.
Mhm.
You know, I'm not being, you know, for the other ones to survive and not starve to death, you know, you got to take 50 of them. You know, I think once you get beyond that and explain people why that 20 have to go so that 50 of them can survive, it makes more sense. But I can see where, to your point, if you're not as involved, or if you're not as aware, you'd be like, oh my God, that's just horrible. Like, why can't we feed them all? You can, but then you're going to be perpetuating the cycle of starving.
Right.
I mean, it does take a different mindset. And I think I've been in it where, you know, my upbringing and also like me being open-minded has helped because, you know, it's also saved me from getting into pitched battles with people unnecessarily. But I agree, like compromising isn't a bad thing. You know, like there's always going to be some part of you, Brian, or you, John, that it is, I always say to people, it is what it is, right? Like you got to, part of it is not going to change, you know, but 25% of it can, right? Like I'm always going to love cats, you know. If you said cats are bad, I'd be like, I want to go outside and talk about it.
Yeah.
You know, but at the same time, like I took my feral cat out of the backyard because I didn't want it killing those beautiful migratory birds that I have. And I realized like if I didn't take that cat, it was gonna get hit by a car.
Mhm.
I'm open-minded enough to realize that I didn't just rescue the cat for the sake of rescue it. For a while, we weren't sure we were gonna keep her, you know. But she's so sick, and I even said to the vets, "I'll pay to get her better," which was thousands of dollars, you know.
Mhm.
She was pregnant. She was a 6-month-old starving pregnant kitten who had every known to man. I think she was literally living as a feral and got pregnant and was looking for a place to live. So we had to get her fixed. Had to get her dewormed. But I didn't. I said to my husband, "I'm not just rescuing her because you know she needs rescuing. I'm rescuing her because all those beautiful evening grosbeaks, which are migratory in New Jersey, you know, she's a hunter. That's her job. She would have killed them. You know, so." But I think I think it's hard for people, you know, look, you know, that cat has every right to be living outside. It
Mhm.
does. You know, she might have survived if we hadn't intervened. But at the same time, you know, there are rare birds in my backyard. I would like to continue to see them. And so I had to make a trade, you know. Leave that cat alone and would have killed a bunch of birds, you know, or bring that cat inside and ultimately save its life. You know, so I appreciate that, you know, there is that understanding out there. And I think, you know, as long as we help people see that it's not such a line in the sand,
Mhm.
when people are like, it's a glass half full, I'm like, it's just a glass. I'm like, why do you care if it's half
Right.
full? Like, that is literally like when people start getting that arbitrary, I'm like, dude, Brian has a glass of water. John has a glass of Coke. I have a glass of Gatorade. It's a glass. Doesn't matter what it is.
Right.
But I think not everyone can think that, right? Like you can let go of that a little bit, you know, it makes that conversation, you know, so much easier. So that's why I'm glad you guys, oh no, here comes my cat. I'm glad you guys brought me on the show. Come here. Because I think it's better for all of us too. And I feel like I've met so many people, and just knowing that there's other people out there who are like-minded, it does help you feel a little better going back to self-care. And it does help you realize that it's okay to be different. You know, because we started talking about the stereotypical molds that all of us have in, you know, being a shed hunting, fishing Asian American, right? Like there's not, I get it. There's not too many of me out there, right? You know, and at the same time, part of me was like, why? I'm sure there's more out there, right? We just have to find this different group of people out there, you know. So I'm just glad we were able to find each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's super
Yeah,
cool that we were able to connect and you know, get together and do a lot of really cool stuff because you know, being able to talk and converse and share the experiences, that's why John and I do this so much. Oh, there's Kitty. He's like, dude, I am out of here. Check him out.
it's taken it's taken me forever to be able to pick her up. Like so much stranger danger, right? Like
Now they see us and it's
it's
like,
almost like
yeah.
she'll yeah. So she wants, the joke is she likes to sleep on the bed with me, but it's on her own terms, right? Even if I pick her up and carry her up, she literally will jump off the bed on purpose and they get back. She's like, no, I have to do it my way. You know, so I even said to my son, like, 13 pounds of squirmy cat, like, I don't force her to be picked up, but I have to be able to grow up and not have her mom me to death. So
Mhm.
I try to pick her up when I can. You know, but you know, she's like, but then she'll find me later and try to sit on my lap. And I'm like, really? This is all for show? And she's like, yeah, I'm just gonna be like, ugh. Then she'll be like, hi.
Well, John, you got
But
anything else?
we've digressed.
Yeah.
No, dude. I've just Kathryn, thanks so much once again for coming on. This has been an absolute pleasure. It's been fantastic. I just really appreciate all your thoughts on everything, and it's just so awesome what you're doing. So please go out there and keep doing it. It's awesome. I love seeing it all through your Instagram, and I hope to continue to be able to stay in touch and hear all of your wonderful stories. So thank you so much for coming on here.
Well, thank you. And I'd be happy to come back and do like, oh, I don't know, 6 months from now and see how many fish hooks I've taken out of my hands, you know.
That would be awesome.
We'll do it. Well, maybe we can go, you know, virtual shed hunting together. I don't know how that would work, you know. Oh my goodness. But thank you again, guys. And I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. I know Brian, you work it early, so
Yeah.
thank you for
Well,
that.
oh, no problem. Well, you know, Kathryn, like I want to echo what John said. Really appreciate you coming on. It's just so fascinating. Like I said, just to kind of reiterate how many different things you're doing, how much you're involved with, and how much your passion you have for the outdoors, the fishing, the shed hunting, the wildlife. You know, really getting out there and enjoying everything to its fullest, taking your son out, you know, really making this something that's visibly accessible. It's just super cool. And yes, we will have you back on and to continue on this conversation. Um, you know, I certainly hope that for our listeners out there, you go check out Kathryn. She's under Lady Shed Hunter on Instagram. We'll put that in the show notes. Just go check out what she's doing, and something that I think Kathryn is really opened up my eyes to is you know, connecting with some of those local groups, those local chapters of like the Trout Unlimited, the Audubon Society. You know, you know, John and I, we're not like club guys, you know, and I don't want to speak for John on that subject because I don't think we've talked about it a lot. I know for myself, I'm not like a massive club person. I'm not like one of those people, but if there's a way for somebody to represent their TU chapter like Kathryn has represented her chapter today, I think your membership would do a lot better because number one, we're not getting this unapproachability, and this is more for the people here on the West Coast. I know we all want to protect trout and we want to protect steelhead and salmon and we want to protect the bank habitat, and even in the South, you know, we talk about John's favorite fish and river, everything else. If you guys could take some notes here from how Kathryn was to interact with, you guys could probably grow your membership about 100 times bigger. Because if I was in your area, Kathryn, I would join just based on you, because it's nice to hear somebody that's not, you know, so stuck on one methodology of fishing. You're inclusive. You understand that inclusion part, and that's probably the most important thing. It's not a female, male, color, or anything else. The fishing in outdoors to me is the great equalizer, because it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you come from. It has no bearing on it. And I think that that's something where yes, we do need representation from all ethnic backgrounds, all races, and you know, sexes, and everything. We need representation across the board. But the outdoors doesn't care who you are. It'll eat you alive in 5 seconds, and it doesn't care that you like this or you prefer this, or you know, you don't like, you know, a mocha and you like black coffee, whatever. You know, the outdoors doesn't care. It is the equalizer, and more folks from everywhere need to realize that, and especially people that are thinking, well, this isn't for me. This is like the good old boys club. And you think maybe a couple guys like John and I, out there on the dock, it's like, why the hell am I going to go out there and hang out with these guys? They're just, a couple good old boys or whatever, but that's not the case. This is fully accessible. So Kathryn, now that I'm done with my long-winded speech, thank you again for being on the show. Really appreciate it. And just want to make sure, if you enjoy these episodes, you enjoy these podcasts, please make sure to follow us on Instagram at Working Class Fishing. You can also find us at Working Class Fishing on YouTube. Check us out both ways. If you have any show suggestions, make sure that you send us over an email at workingclassfish@gmail.com, or go ahead and drop us a line over there on Instagram, or even make a comment on YouTube. So until next time, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being here with us, Kathryn, and make sure you get out there and get some fishing in. So thanks again, everybody. Hope you have a great one.